Hi, I'm Arthur von Wiesenberger, the host of Animal Zone, and you're watching The Good Life with Dean Wilson.
Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you've joined us from wherever you are around the world. We're so grateful. We see so many of you joining us at goodlifetelevision.org from all around the world, and also on our social media platforms. We love having you. We're here to talk about the good stuff. There's plenty of the other stuff around you can find, but we're here to talk about the good stuff. We're here to honor, inspire, encourage, bless, and so we hope you are enjoying it. We've had some wonderful guests. You can find them all at goodlifetelevision.org. We also break the long form interviews into what we call power clips, which are some of the great moments from those interviews. So we hope you'll check it out. I have a great guest today. Arthur von Wiesenberger is with me. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean. It's great to be here. It is a good life just being right here.
It's a good life. We got our mugs. We got, what else do we need?
And good weather.
And good weather.
Yeah.
I was reading about you. I mean, I'm not trying to flatter you, but it's probably easier to talk about what you haven't done. You haven't played in the NBA.
No. I haven't been in the investment banking business.
Right. Well, it's a fascinating life. All around the world, you've had so many different initiatives and impact. What's been your favorite thing you've done, if you can narrow it?
Well, besides right now, I think probably working on this TV show that I've been doing called Animal Zone. It's just been a kind of fulfillment in doing things that I love, which has always been the goal. Try and do what you love.
Yeah.
And they say if you do what you love, money will follow. Well, I'm still doing what I love, but I'm not sure about the money following me yet. But
it's still chasing.
It's still, yeah. But it is something that, if you do something you really feel passionate about, time flies. I mean, you get in front of a project like that, and you suddenly realize, wow, it's another year. Where'd that year go? Yeah. And that's always a good sign. Whereas I've worked in some, careers that the time moved real slow. Yeah. And I keep going, gosh, it's still January 4th. Right. So I think the animal project was great, but my life has been wonderful. I have no complaints. I've been so fortunate.
Yeah. Your dad is an investment banker, had 2 seats on the New York Stock Exchange. Your mom was an actress, I believe.
Right. Yeah. She was in Hollywood back in the early days, and played in a number of films and was on stage. And I think that's what attracted my dad to her originally, was that she was very glamorous and a lot of fun. And he was sort of more serious, nuts and bolts, and a very late bachelor. He didn't get married until he was in his 50s. Oh, really? Which back in those days was like, rare. Very rare.
Yeah. What did you learn from your parents?
Well, I had 2 opposites there, because my mom was liberal, my father was conservative. They were always battling with each other over that. Like, for example, we go to a restaurant, and my dad would sit down and he would figure out the percentage of the tip, actually take out the tax, and was that specific, because he felt that was what was right. My mother, on the other hand, thought that was ridiculous, and so she would reach into pocket and throw another whatever amount of money on there on top of it. And so he used to call her Lady Bountiful. But be that as it may, it was 2 different ways. She was very socially minded and social causes, and my dad was very much more into political causes. He'd been very close to Dwight Eisenhower, and so I'm kind of schizophrenic because I like both sides. There were, I think actually Eisenhower said the best place to be when you're driving in a Jeep down the road is in the middle of the road, and maybe he was right on that.
Right. It's not a bad thought for today.
But what I learned from my parents were, to be kind. I think that's number 1. To love what you're doing, to not be critical as much as you can. Because sometimes you're wrong.
Right.
And to love as much as you can. But you either be your parents, your kids, your friends, and that's kind of been my MO.
I want to get into Animal Zone in a second, but you've also done this program. You've done lots of programs. You've done, like I said, lots of things. But you've done this program around the world, and you've traveled a lot. What is it about travel? What is it about that kind of lights your fire?
Well, travel became kind of a way of living for me, because my parents moved in the 60s to Europe. My dad had sold his business to Nuveen, and then we just packed up and moved to Italy because he had friends in Italy and loved Rome, and he was going to do a little consulting with the Vatican on economic issues.
Yeah.
So we lived in Rome. I enjoyed Rome, but quickly my parents realized that living the La Dolce Vita was not probably a good thing for a teenager. So they got me off to a boarding school in Switzerland.
Oh, really?
And it was a great boarding school called Aiglon College, British school, and their goal was to get you out of just the academic work and get out into nature. So they were a little bit like Outward Bound, where you'd have to go out and go hiking, and you'd spend nights in the snow, camping. But what you really got from that was that momentary discomforts aren't all that bad, and you can overcome them. And whether it's climbing to the top of a mountain or cozying up next to a cow or two, it was a great experience. And because Switzerland's right in the sort of heart of Europe, you can go anywhere pretty quickly, and we'd have expeditions and trips to different cities. We'd go to the opera in Milan, La Scala, or we might go to a place in churches in Germany. I mean, we really got to see a lot of different sides of Europe.
Wow, so you got the bug.
That got the bug going, and you suddenly realize travel is so enriching.
Yeah.
And it opens your mind, and it opens you to new experiences, and you kind of get addicted to it. It's like these last couple of, since the pandemic, it's been kind of tough.
Right.
Because I haven't traveled much further than Oxnard.
Which is a great place.
It's not a bad place, And there's a great restaurant in Oxnard, by the way, called it's called Cabo Grill. It's a wonderful Mexican restaurant on Oxnard Boulevard.
And you've written, I know Santa Barbara Magazine, you've done a restaurant. What you were kind of on the front end of bottled water, of all things. You wrote books about this. You've covered it for. What brought that to bear?
Well, we go back to Italy. So we're living in, actually, we'd been in Naples, which is not the cleanest place in 1965 or 4. It was very polluted, and unfortunately, I had gotten typhoid in Naples from contaminated water. And you don't think about water until you get sick from it, or you don't have it. And I ended up going into a hospital in Rome, and just one room over from me was another guy who was in the same place I'd been, who'd gotten also typhoid. So you realize that water you can't take it for granted, and you got to be careful about what you're drinking. So after that experience, and I survived, although I got down to about 80 pounds, which was the best diet I've ever been on.
Right.
But you're cooking at 106 degrees most of the time with temperatures, so it's not a great way to go. So once I got out of that, I started drinking bottled water because I didn't trust the tap water in certain cities, having gotten sick from it. And I noticed that there's a lot of different kinds of bottled water. In Europe, and especially in Italy, every little community has their own bottled water that they bottle from a local spring. And you might have 3 or 4. At the time, Italy had over 200 brands of bottled water.
Oh my gosh.
So it was a very regional business, although there were a few national brands. And I kept a little log of which ones I liked. Some were sweeter, some were salty, some were too bubbly, some were flat. And ultimately, I came up with a list of what my favorites were. And that kind of got me thinking, gee, not all waters are created equally. There are differences, and why are there differences? And you sort of sit there and go, well, as I looked into it, there's differences because of the mineralization of the natural springs. When the water comes down from the sky and it goes percolates into the earth, it picks up minerals as it travels underground. And sometimes water can stay underground for hundreds of years, even thousands of years. And then it comes out eventually as a spring. And as it's traveled all those years underwater, it's gotten this kind of profile, if you will, of minerals like sodium, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and also trace elements too. So in a way, it's like a fingerprint. No two waters are identical. And when you taste it, you can taste those differences. Sometimes it's very, very apparent, because in Europe, they love minerals in water. It's kind of the opposite of America. In Europe, they'll go for the spa waters, the waters that are used in different spas like Avion or Vitel or Apollinaris. But in America, we like water for what's not in it. We don't want, generally, we don't want sodium. We don't want chlorine. A lot of people don't want fluoride. So we drink water for what's not in it. In Europe, they drink water for what's in it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And that's what got me started.
So a typhoid episode that took you to 80 pounds ended up becoming
A career.
a career.
Yeah. Well,
See, that's amazing.
Well, what happened was when I started writing, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I had all this information about water, and I reached out to the bottlers, asking them about why do people buy your water? I mean, some of these water companies, even in America, go back over 100 years, like Mountain Valley from Hot Springs. And they had all this material about why their water is bottled. Anecdotal material, some of it was factual material, but it was all fascinating. And so I kept filling up file cabinets with all this stuff. And as I looked at it all, I went, gee, I was going to write this up as a little article for a magazine that was interested in it, but it's too much for an article. And I went to a guy here in Santa Barbara named Noel Young, who owned Capra Press. Noel was a great publisher. He published Henry Miller books. He published a lot of great writers. And he had just come out with a book about hot tubs, because hot tubs were just beginning to happen in Santa Barbara and in California as a new trend. And so when I came to his office, I said, Noel, I've got this book about water. It's about bottled water. And he scratched his head and said, bottled water? And it just so happened that his doctor told him he has to stop drinking everything else. So he was looking for an alternative beverage. Really? And so water was sort of resonated with him. And then we went downstairs to a restaurant from his office called the Head of the Wolf. And in the restaurant, on the tables, were these little Perrier bottles with flowers in them. I don't know if you remember, you're too young to remember this, but in those days, Perrier was just starting to get going in the States. And they were putting the bottles on tables with little flowers in it to give it personality. Yeah. And he asked the guy, Craig Bigelow, who owned the restaurant, he said, are people actually buying water? And Craig says, I can't believe it, but they are. And he looked at me and said, next thing they're going to do is buy air. So that's kind of how the book got started. And wow. The book came out in 1978 called Oasis, The Complete Guide to Bottled Water Throughout the World.
And then it's been republished a couple of times?
Well, one of the problems is if you ever write a book, don't say The Complete Guide to anything, because you're always going to miss people. And then they're going to write to you and say, how could you miss us? You know, and so I kept coming up with new versions of the book with added bottlers.
Fascinating. Let's talk about Animal Zone. Animal Zone, it's a TV series. It's animalzone.org, which has won several awards. And now Animal Zone, because I guess this deal you have with Cox, is in like 4 million households, apparently. Prime time.
We hope, yeah.
We hope, yeah. And the goals are to, from what I read, to rescue animals and to encourage folks to think in terms of rescue and to think in terms of just caring for animals. Mm-hmm. But talk about animals. Animals are wonderful.
They are wonderful. And you know what started this was we were watching TV, and you remember that Sarah McLachlan's ad that goes for ASPCA? She'd start singing that really sad, emotional song, and then you'd see these poor animals in cages that looked like they're at death's door. And I mean, it got to the point where when that ad came on, we'd get the remote control and switch right away because it was too depressing. Yeah. And so I spoke to a friend who had a shelter here in town, and I said, you know, that makes me so sad when I see that commercial. I wouldn't want to go to a shelter because I get the sense that it's going to be the most depressing experience in the world. Is this thing helping you? And she said, no, actually it's hurting us because we're trying to, you know, make it a happy experience. You're going to find your new best friend. You're going to bring a new member of the family. Right. And you look at that commercial, and it looks like, you know, you're going to be walking away. Your kids are going to be crying. It's going to be terrible. Right. So I said, well, maybe what someone should do, i.e. me, is do a show that completely changes that perspective. That the shelters are a happy place. That they're offering promise to the animal and promise to the community that they serve. And she said, that sounds like a good idea. And so having gone to Brooks and studied filmmaking and so forth, I thought, well, we can make a nice little half-hour show about this and go out just in the local community and talk with people who are animal welfare experts who could help educate our viewers. And then we could talk to maybe some people who are a little bit on the fringe of animal awareness. I mean, like a pet psychic or something to give it some entertainment value, and then we could hopefully get to a point where people see these great animals and are inspired to adopt. So educate, entertain, and inspire were really the goals of the show. And we started in 2018, and now we've got over 78 episodes in the can.
It's taken off.
It's really worked well. Yeah.
I saw you had Christopher Lloyd with his dogs. And Dean Eastwood and all these. It's great.
Jimmy Connors. I mean, Peter Noon's been on. I mean, a lot of celebrities locally are very generous with their time and energy, and they're willing to come on and support a good cause.
That's great. I want to ask you in a second about Monty Roberts.
Yeah.
But talk about where do people find Animal Zone?
Well, there's a couple places. First of all, you can find, if you're in different markets, I mean, it's in California, we're in about, maybe 30 some odd states. And if you go on the animalzone.org website and click on where to watch, you can see all the different stations that we're on and the different times. But generally it's on a Saturday at 9 o'clock in most markets, 9:30 in Las Vegas because they stay up later. But in general, you can watch all the episodes online too, which is not a bad alternative because, streaming is sort of the way things are heading.
Yeah, when you want it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I was reading about some of the folks you've had on, I saw Monty Roberts, and I've been up to
Flag
Is Up. And talk about fascinating. I mean, I don't know how many people know about Monty, but Monty is kind of around here referred to as the horse whisperer. And he's had a legendary work with horses. And as I was reading about it, I was thinking, there's kind of an evolution in terms of, in this case, about how we relate to animals, how we relate, in his case, to horses. From the old school, we're going to break the horse, to Monty's approach, which is completely different. And when you hear about it and you see it, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was kind of like, wow. But talk about, because I know you mentioned in here that how we relate to animals says a lot about us.
It's true. I mean, it was a wonderful statement. I don't know if it's Gandhi who said it, but you can judge a society by the way they treat their animals. And it's really true. When you see a loving society that is kind to their animals, they're usually kind to each other as well. Monty was, I think, very much on the cutting edge because he saw that breaking a horse, first of all, took a lot of time. It took weeks. And it was not a good experience for the horse. It was scary.
Yeah. And
horses already got that sense of flight, and they're a little bit nervous. So, if a person comes in and just is like the dominating force, and you're going to do this or else, it's not a good beginning of a relationship. Not with a horse or with another person or anybody, So I liked what he thought because he said, you can get a horse to trust you by body language and by attitude. I mean, horses can tell so much about us that we don't realize. They know your pulse, which is incredible. So they're very perceptive, and they're very loving animals. I've learned over this course of the show to absolutely adore horses, and I always sort of was a little bit nervous around a horse because they were big animals and they could throw you and other things like that. So Monty would look at the horse, build up a trust with the horse, and he could sometimes within an hour be on top of the horse, riding the horse, because he made a pact with that horse that they were friends. And to see it is fantastic. And the Queen of England is a great fan of his, and he has a big picture of her in his room. But he's truly amazing, and he also loves other animals, not just horses. He has these deer around his house. If you ever go up to the Flag Is Up farms, you'll see all these deer running around, and they are like wild pets. They love to come to him because they know he's a sweet man and he loves deer.
And what he's doing with veterans with PTSD with the horses is just spectacular.
Yeah, there's so much therapeutic benefits of interfacing with an animal, and how you can find calmness and peace in your own life. And I think the pandemic was a perfect example of when things kind of got topsy-turvy and everybody didn't know what they were doing, and a lot of people were really lonely. there was an enormous upsurge of adoptions of animals. For a while, organizations like the Santa Barbara Humane here in Santa Barbara and also in Santa Maria had run out of animals to adopt. They were going as far away as Bakersfield and beyond to get dogs out of shelters there, or cats, and bring them to Santa Barbara because there was such a high demand.
Wow.
And so that maybe was the good thing that came out of this crisis, was a lot of new friends found homes.
Yeah, and you practice what you preach. You've adopted, rescued, whatever. What animals do you have, or have you had?
All right. Well, I've had animals all my life, and my parents did. But the animals that I've adopted or rescued recently include 3 cats. One of them was born wild up in a ranch that I'm involved in up in the Sequoias, and she's a little tiny kitty. Her name is Electra, and her brothers and sisters were freaked out. They were feral, but for some reason she made that leap from feral to domestic and became very friendly just as a kitten. So I'd see her and pet her and visit with her as much as I could. And then one day I decided, well, you know, this is a scary environment because we've got wild bobcat up here. We got a lot of bears. We got a lot of things that coyote could be predators. So I said, you're too domesticated and too great. So I brought her home to here, and she's still got that wild sense a little bit, but that's okay because every morning I get up to brush my teeth, she climbs up onto my neck here and she starts licking my ear while I'm brushing my teeth. Really? And I'm not sure whether she just thinks that's part and parcel with brushing teeth or not, but my ears are really clean, you know. And then, so we got her, and then we were filming Animal Zone down in LA, and we were doing an interview with the people who have an organization called Kitten Rescue LA, and they rescue just kittens. And they have around-the-clock volunteers who bottle feed the baby kittens because kittens need constant feeding every 2 hours. So we were filming, and I was in this one room where all these little kittens were running around, really fun room. And I'm interviewing, kind of like you are, but in reverse, the woman who runs this organization. And this little black kitten climbs up onto my shoulder while I'm talking to her, and he starts licking my ear. I don't know what it's about my ear, but he starts licking my ear. And I look at him, and he is the cutest little black and white cat. And the crew had to stop because his back end was facing the camera, not a very pretty shot. But nonetheless, by the end of that interview, not only did I adopt him, but he had a bonded brother. And so I turned up coming back to Santa Barbara with both of them. So there's 3 cats at home. There's a dog named Mikey who we had adopted when he was only 8 months old. He was a pit bull, but had some real physical issues, and he'd been rescued by Isabella, who has Care for Paws here in town, and he was the greatest dog. And I mean, as animals go, he's like, you know, you end up finding your soulmate, and he was like my soulmate. Unfortunately, he passed last year, and it was devastating, you know. But you know, the good news is we had a great life together. And he was a mascot of the first few episodes, I think 3 seasons with him, 4. And then we had 2 donkeys that were rescued off of BLM land. They were rounding up all the donkeys, and they were putting them into pens, and they were either going to move them somewhere or do other things which I don't want to think about, but they were looking for organizations or people that wanted to adopt them. So we have 2 donkeys, 2 males, 2 jacks, named Watson and Eli. And they're now in their mid-20s. And then we have a mule that lived down the street from us. And the donkeys used to break out of the corral to go down and visit the mule. And then we'd hear from the neighbor, your donkeys are here again. And I go, yeah. He says, why don't you just please take the mule, because they seem to want to be together. And we said, all right.
So you adopted a mule.
So we have a mule. Her name is Jenny, and she's the boss of the house. And she's amazing. She really looks like a horse on the upper half, and then the lower half looks like, I don't know, donkey meets the Michelin Man. I'm not sure. She's really round.
The goodbye part is the tough part, is that with animals.
You know, that's the thing about an animal, is you have that animal and you have the best 12, 15, 20 years ever, and then you have that one terrible day. And it's the hardest part, because it is an unconditional love that you have with an animal. And they don't judge you, and they're just happy as anything to see you. When you come home, it's the best moment. Hey, if you sometimes just walk out the door for a minute or two and then come back in, it's like you've been gone for weeks. They're so happy to see you.
Right.
And I don't get that anywhere else.
There is, the unconditional love. I mean, that, whatever kind of day you're having, that puppy or that, I mean, that's a true thing. Yeah. So what's the vision? I mean, you're just going to keep growing Animal Zone, keep doing shows, and keep trying to grow the audience and get the message out.
Well, what we found is we've got so much. I mean, we've done 78 episodes, and that's pretty much mostly in California, and most of it is in Southern California. So we're hoping in the next few seasons to expand beyond California and shoot in Nevada and Arizona and Oregon. I mean, the story of animal welfare and animal rescue and animal education is just, it's vast. And there's so many groups that are animal lovers, and we kind of want to highlight those nonprofits especially that are dedicated. A lot of them are just mom and pop the type of operations where they love animals and they see a need to look after them for a community.
That's beautiful.
So that's our hope.
At this so you've started a nightclub, you've been an entrepreneur, you've written, what gets you up in the morning now? I mean, you've done so much, and obviously Animal Zone's probably one thing, but I mean, what is kind of what gets you up in the morning?
Well, what gets me up in the morning are the cats. they jump on the bed. I'm going, whoa, who's that? They don't seem to think that when your eyes are shut, that means you can't play. But no, what gets me up in the morning is continuing with Animal Zone. But you mentioned the nightclubs, and that was one of those great moments in time. Doing something that you don't really. I mean, I didn't even imagine I'd be in the nightclub business. Really? I mean, I was a customer of nightclubs back when I was in my 20s and 30s, but I was never thinking about owning one. In fact, we almost opened in Dallas. We had a location at Travis Walk.
Travis Walk.
You remember that area?
Yeah.
But what we did was open a club, which was just we needed some place to go that wasn't a typical bar back in the early 80s in Santa Barbara. I mean, there was mostly just bars, and they were mostly, it wasn't a kind of place you'd want to dress up and go to, and we wanted a place you could dress up and take a date to and be nice. Yeah. So we thought, well, let's do a wine bar, because wine bars were being popular, and let's put in something that was popular to play in a wine bar, which was a backgammon game, because backgammon was very popular in the 80s, early 80s. Well, we found out two things. One is that wine wasn't what people really wanted to drink exclusively. They liked champagne more than wine, and so as we kept putting more champagne on the list, we noticed that was what we were selling, and the wine was kind of falling in the background. And the other thing we found out was that if you have backgammon, even though they're not allowed to, people sometimes gamble, and they would sit down and they'd nurse a glass of water throughout the entire evening. And we couldn't pay our rent selling a glass of water. Right. So we got rid of the backgammon tables, and we brought in a dance floor and turned up the music. People started dancing. We had salty food, made them thirsty. I mean, I hate to say the strategies, but that got the champagne flowing. Right. And ultimately, it became kind of synonymous with champagne and the good life. Good name for a show. And also, we opened in Santa Barbara in '82, and by 1984, we had expanded to Beverly Hills and opened on Rodeo Drive.
I read that. And weren't you guys selling some enormous percentage of the total champagne in the country or something?
When we had both places going, because we were really champagne exclusive. We did in the LA club, we had other liquors, but we really tried to price everything where the champagne was, you could have a glass of champagne or you could have a cocktail, but it'd be the same price. So we tried to really promote champagne, and that's what people seemed to like back in those days. The 80s were great. Music was great, the atmosphere was fun. And so we'd be doing these events, and sometimes there'd be 1,000 people. We did one event that we took over the entire interior of the Rodeo collection, which is where we were located at 421 North Rodeo. And we do these events where they build a pyramid. Have you ever seen that? Where they have these glasses, and they build a pyramid out of these glasses, and then they pour champagne on top, and it comes cascading down. Yeah. and then everyone grabs a glass, or maybe not, and drinks some of the champagne. We would do those kind of events that really got a lot of champagne flowing. And at the end of the day, I think Time Magazine did a story about it where they mentioned we were doing 5% of all the imported French champagne at one point.
Oh my gosh.
Which is a lot of bubbles.
That's a lot of champagne.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's fascinating. Great life. What a life. Blessed.
Yeah.
And congratulations on everything you've done and the impact you've had and are having. Animalzone.org. Animalzone.org is where you can find Arthur, and hope you'll check it out. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Dean.
It's great.
It really was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Really great.
Thank you. And we'll see you next time. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Great program today. Geoff Green is with me. He's the Chief Executive Officer at the Santa Barbara City College Foundation. He's also a nonprofit expert. He's a great guy. We had a great time. You're going to enjoy it. Geoff Green, The Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you've joined us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org, where you can see all the interviews, as well as what we call power clips, which are kind of special moments from all those interviews. There's some great people. Over the last year, we've had a lot of wonderful guests. We've learned a lot, from entrepreneurs to young people, public servants, athletes. We've had a little bit of everything. So it's been a lot of fun. We hope you'll join us at goodlifetelevision.org. And I'm so glad to have my guest here today. Geoff Green is with me. Geoff, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Geoff is the CEO at the Santa Barbara City College Foundation, which is here obviously in Santa Barbara where we are. And Geoff's had a very interesting kind of journey in business, specifically the nonprofit world, that I'm excited to unpack. But first of all, just tell me, you grew up in the San Francisco area. Tell me a little bit about your growing up and your family.
Certainly. So I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. My mom was a 6th grade teacher. Actually, a whole lot of folks in my family are teachers.
Oh, really?
To this day. My dad was a juvenile probation officer. So the joke was I got away with nothing, which was only kind of a joke. But I grew up there, went to school there through the public school system, and then came down to Santa Barbara in 1990 to go to UCSB. So that's what brought me to town. And my full intention and assumption was that this was just for college, and I'd head either back north or elsewhere. And some 30 years later, here I am.
Here you are.
So.
Well, and after college, you had a dream to go to Yosemite,
Yes.
And be a park ranger.
Yeah, that was my dream job from the time I can remember. My parents went there, my grandparents before them, I'm sure even before them. That was sort of a family camping tradition, and I have a photo, I think, of when I was 6 months old standing in front of Yosemite Falls.
Really?
So that was something I loved to do. I thought it was a way to combine all the different things I loved, and I thought, well, if I could be a park ranger, that would be perfect. And sure enough, I had the opportunity to do that at first as an intern. Actually, there was an intern program organized through the universities, and then as a full-time ranger naturalist for a few years, and I did that until 1997.
Yeah, and then you came to join the Fund for Santa Barbara. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, that's what brought me back.
And talk about that season in your life and your career.
Yeah, well, I was, I'm a proud generalist. It's interesting that I work alongside academic specialists because I'm the opposite of that. And I, in a earlier time, it probably would have been called a Renaissance person, but these days it's just considered unfocused. So,
Renaissance is better.
I like Renaissance better. But yeah, I really wanted to do. I love the educating, public speaking, connecting with people. And I had done a lot of different things through my college time too. I'd gotten very involved in student politics, running for office and sitting on the student senate and associated student president, those sorts of things. I did a lot of volunteer work. I got really interested in solving homelessness and housing issues. A lot of environmental work was really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. I'd done a radio show for a while on our KCSB public radio station there. So it was just sort of a little bit of everything, and when I was trying to figure out, I ultimately decided that coming back to Santa Barbara was what I wanted to do. But the question was how, and what would I possibly do, and who would pay me to do it.
Right.
So the Fund for Santa Barbara ended up being the place, and it was largely because the link between all the things I was really passionate about were what you might broadly call sort of social justice issues, and I wanted to figure out how to solve some of those big problems.
Right.
And the fund was a hub for that, and they really were a spot for supporting innovative grassroots, in many cases experiments in the nonprofit sector. And so that's what that was before cell phones, and I remember I had to fax my resume. And
right.
If you remember faxes,
I do.
And then have a phone interview, and then drive down here, and then drive back, and
wow.
but that's what brought me back.
I want to talk about the Santa Barbara City College Foundation that you lead, and kind of maybe start with kind of your vision for that foundation, and specifically the SBCC Promise part of this.
Sure.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any experience with community college personally. Well, actually, I say that that's not true. I had two things that only later occurred to me. One is that I had taught a course through adult education on homelessness and housing policy with a co-teacher who was a faculty member at UCSB, and I think that was in around the year 2000. And then I'd also taken Spanish classes, and so I had a little bit of experience. But when the one program I really knew well when I started in 2015 with the SBCC Foundation was called Transitions, and it's only because we funded it as the Fund for Santa Barbara. And this is for men and women who are incarcerated who want to come back straight into college. And so they do prep and enrollment while they're incarcerated so that they can come back and enroll immediately afterward. And so I was aware of that program. I thought it was fantastic. It was one of the earlier ones in the nation. It's not that uncommon these days, but that was one of the earlier. And so I ultimately found the link between the things I loved and this role. But it was a strange way to enter. I mean, it was sort of a back and forth with the board at the time about, was this what did they want to do, and did I want to be the guy to do it, and could we work together in these ways? So once we got there and I got excited about this role, I had a lead time of a few months. And during that, President Obama at the time and Governor Bill Haslam, so the Democratic president, Republican governor of Tennessee, which in itself was remarkable. There's very little bipartisanship happening. And they did a joint press conference on a thing called the Tennessee Promise. And that was the first time I ever heard the term. And it caught my ear, and I listened to what they were promoting. And it wasn't long before I started to hear more and more about that and really dive into that notion. And there's another funny side note. Tom Hanks, who I don't have to explain who Tom Hanks is. Tom Hanks, when I was growing up as a kid, he'd gone to Chabot College, which was the community college nearest where I grew up in the East Bay Area, in Hayward there.
Okay.
And basically, in my region, you had to know three things growing up. You had to know reading, writing, and Tom Hanks went to Chabot. That's what you had to know, because this is the era where Big and all the big films come up. So he wrote a couple of pieces actually. One in particular that got circulated widely about the value of community colleges, and so that was kind of an exciting junction for me between that reality, my memories of being a kid and knowing that he was a community college graduate, and then all of the things that were starting to happen around College Promise. So it was early in my time. I started in February 2015, and within the first few months, every conference I went to, there was some conversation about College Promise. And the basic notion is that the idea of universal public education for up to high school was actually a fairly controversial debate 100 years ago in this country. Does everybody need it? Why should people go to high school if they can run the family business, the family farm, if they can read and write? And of course, today you push that another 4 years further, and it's for many people, high school isn't enough for whatever they may want to do. And community college now is the question, I think, at hand. And I think it is the best possible tool for advancement, whether it be personally pursuing your own dreams and building your own skill set, or families being healthy and having the income they need, or socioeconomic advancement. Frankly, anything. So the idea is, can we as a society pay for every young person who wants to go to community college for 2 years? And that's the beginning of the idea.
And where does that go for you? I mean, how are you pursuing that vision?
Well, I ran into, as I said early on, that was something that was talked about at every conference, every conversation. And of course, I was brand new, learning my role. Not new to philanthropy or the community, but certainly new to the community college part of it. and discovered that there were 3 predecessors in our state. So in California, which has the largest community college system, largest higher ed system in the Western world, 116 campuses and colleges now, 72 districts, over 2 million students. A quarter of all community college students in the United States go to a California community college. And there were 3 in California that had started experiments with what they called the Promise. And the first was actually our neighbor Ventura College. And the second was Long Beach. And the third, which had just happened, was at Cuesta College, our other neighbor to the north. Well, just jumping over Hancock to the north. And so I started to get to know what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they were doing it, and hearing about that model, and then looking for something that would solve a bigger issue. And as I said, that was my big passion really, is how do you structurally deal with some of the challenges we have in our community? I mean, scholarships are wonderful, but they don't solve the bigger structural problem. They help that one student. And so this was, to me, an idea of how do you solve the bigger structural problem of affordability and access to college. And so we started asking around, and what we found was that there was a pretty good consensus of what would work and how to do it right, how to do it well, but nobody to that point had done it because it was a very expensive proposition, especially for community colleges, since our philanthropic infrastructure is really nascent. I mean, if you think about the 4-year institutions, the Ivy Leagues, they figured this out 200 years ago.
Right.
I mean, it's a core part of the institution. If you look at the 4-year public universities, it was really the 80s and 90s where they started to build their infrastructure for fundraising and development. And for us, it feels like last Tuesday. You know, we just figured this out, and we're still figuring it out. But the value of being at Santa Barbara City College is that we have one of the largest and one of the oldest foundations in the nation, actually, for community colleges. And so the idea of raising $2 to $3 million a year for a program like this was not unthinkable. And so that's really how we started. We started to build it that way. We leaned on the research and the experiments that had been done by our colleagues before us, so that we didn't have to repeat those painful mistakes ourselves.
Right. Wow.
And that's what we launched in 2015.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
This is obviously an interesting environment. Seems like it's getting more interesting by the day here in the year 2020. But
yeah,
I would, reading your information here, I mean, you're clearly a nonprofit expert or a fundraising professional. You've been on all these councils and boards. And what is your council? I know that there seems like there's kind of a buzzword in the nonprofit world in recent years, sustainability.
Yep.
And I know you do a lot of consulting and things like that. How do you advise nonprofits toward a path that is sustainable?
That's a great question. And yes, that is one of the key issues for nonprofit organizations. I think the first thing, I mean, clarity of mission is always first. So you got to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. I'm a form follows function kind of guy, so I don't have any religion about a particular model being the best, but I do believe that you have to be clear on what you're doing, and then you build the structure that supports that thing, whatever it is. And for nonprofits, it's revenue strategy above all, because that's the thing that you have to figure out once you've got your mission clear.
Right.
How do you sustain it? How do you make it happen? And almost as a rule, the more diverse the income stream, the better. So you want to help people figure out what are all the different ways that you can earn those dollars. And the primary reason for that, and this is true in for-profit business as well, is that the most sustainable, the most resilient income stream is the one that's the most diverse. And that's because if one of them goes sideways, it doesn't sink you. So you can lose all of your grant funding, or you can lose all of your earned income, or you can lose all of your major donor base for a short time and be okay, as long as that was only just a piece of it. But for those nonprofits that are dependent on 1 or 2 grant makers, or a handful of donors, or a very specific single income source that's an earned revenue source, that's the most dangerous, because something's going to happen at some point that's going to endanger that. And once that does happen, you got to be ready with a backup plan. So that's a big part of it. The other piece is the board structures, and I'm a kind of a board junkie, if you will.
Are you?
I like boards. I actually like working with boards.
That's so wonderful.
And I sit on boards, and I help other people do that. And it's because it's one of those volunteer jobs where there's only one reason to be there, and that is that you got to be passionate about that mission. You got to love doing it, because that's the reward. You're in the nonprofit sector, you're not getting paid to be on a board. It is a lot of time if you do want to do it well, and you have to be an evangelist for the cause, whatever it may be, out in the community. So I think that having the right board, having the right overall structure, and the income revenue structure is the key once you've got the mission clear.
That's great.
So.
And do you like advise boards? Is that part of what you do?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so the fund, it was interesting for me that the fund, I kind of parlayed my love of teaching, and at least my version of it, alongside my passion for the nonprofit sector. And then at the fund, we had a technical assistance program, still very much there and thriving. And that's just a jargony term for everything but the check. So what other support can you offer? And so it was access to resources and teaching and models and all that. And so I started to do a lot of that and just kind of share what I had seen that worked, or what I'd learned, or what I knew from experience. And that kind of built and built and built. And that's ultimately what made me I guess a consultant. I'll put that in finger quotes.
Well, no, I mean, if you're an expert, you're an expert.
But I do love it, and that's where it started. So I do. I don't do as much as I once did, because the work with the foundation is absolutely a full-time job.
Yeah.
But I do. I mean, there's a lot of partnerships there. You know, the lines are, in my opinion, very, very gray between what our work is and what these other partners' work might be. So we work with a lot of folks, and some of that is helping and coaching and mentoring boards.
I think that's really valuable.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a great board, and I'm so thankful if they're watching.
Yeah, I saw that. They're watching.
They might be watching. They are great. But I was, as I've worked with our board, I've realized what you just said, which is the only reason you're there is for love. You know, I mean, this is going to be. There is. I mean, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of fanfare, not a lot of benefit to this. There's no personal benefit. I mean, it is purely a service thing, and it can be a lot of work. Yeah. And these are the people that have the fiduciary responsibility for this. It's not the staff.
That's right.
You know, they have all the responsibility on their shoulders, and yet they're unpaid total volunteers.
Yeah.
So that's a tricky.
It is. Thing. It's where the buck stops, and there's a lot of debate, theoretical and wonky nonprofit circles about, does that model still work, and what is that? And the place I've always started, and usually when I'm doing a training for a new board or a younger board, it's to kind of frame it in the legal framework in which a board exists. And really, it's the tax status. So, and we can talk about business in a moment here, but I'm fond of saying that 501c3 is a tax status, not a business model. Because nonprofits are businesses in every way.
Yeah, I don't think they should be called nonprofits myself.
I know.
I think they should be called tax-exempt organizations.
Well, yeah. I mean, how many organizations define themselves by what they're not? I mean, you don't say I'm a.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And if you're a nonprofit, you're not going to be in business.
That's right. That's right. So I'm with you. Let's start that. We'll start that campaign.
Let's do it.
I need something else to do. Let's do that. Well, I think there's some really good points there, and the way that the nonprofit sector was. The trade that we make in the nonprofit sector is that by making the case that our mission is in itself of value. I mean, the idea of taxation is that you're taxed on your commerce or your income or all the things we're taxed on because we have to pay into the common good. So whatever that common good that we all want to share the cost of. And nonprofits make the case that they are the common good, that they're basically what they do is as valuable as any tax they might pay. And so they're excused from some of their taxes. Not all, and people forget that. I mean, we're tax-paying organizations. We pay payroll tax and a lot of the larger taxes. But the idea is they do that, and then in turn, the community, and in this case, the people of the state of California, because nonprofits are incorporated by state just like for-profits are, have the obligation and opportunity to basically make sure that they're making good on their mission. And that's really what the board is supposed to be. Is the representatives of the people of the state to govern and make sure that the nonprofit is doing what it says.
Right.
And so it is an unusual dynamic, especially when you have a long-time or a founding executive director. Nobody's ever going to know more about that work than that person, and yet they report to and ultimately are governed by a board of directors of volunteers.
Right.
So yeah, it's a funny dance.
It
to
is.
Be sure.
No, that's for sure. You've had an interest in homelessness.
Yes.
And I know you've been involved in the efforts here locally for a long time. Mm-hmm. Talk about kind of that interest and also the progress we've made and kind of where you see it going from here.
Yeah, so I'll be very clear. I think housing is a human right. I think we all deserve safe shelter of some kind, and it is, and for most people, fortunately, they do that through their ability to earn an income and pay for housing on the open market. But for others who can't, for any number of reasons, I think one of the things that we're called to do as a community, as a society, is figure out, okay, so then what? I have been really interested in that because it's the most expensive piece of our living arrangement for everybody. I mean, housing usually is the biggest piece of what you pay for. Right. And so there's no easy solution because you can't just do it in a quick way. And of course, emergency shelter beds are critical, but they don't solve the bigger problem. So how do you put that system together? So someone who's on the street has a place to go on a cold night, which people can identify with generally. The soup kitchen model, the shelter bed model. But then ultimately, so where do they go from there? What do you need to get there? And I think there's been a lot of really smart, good experiments, and there are there's thousands of people committed to this work. But it's telling that we've not solved it.
Right.
So 10 years, well, I shouldn't say 10 years ago. I think it was now 12 to 13 years ago, there was a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. And this was a wave of things that came out. The Bush administration had a program at a national level that had pushed this notion of a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. And so a lot of communities signed on to that. There was federal funding for it. And our community was one of them. And I was part of this group of, I think, 40 people that crafted this plan. And if you read the plan today, it's a smart plan. It still holds up. But the fact is we didn't do it. And the reason is we didn't commit the necessary resources. And that happens time and time again, place after place. There's a moment where people's eyes are on the issue, and then it drifts. And so I think political will and philanthropic consistency are the two biggest challenges.
So money was the problem.
I think money and political focus. I mean, it's not a sexy issue. It's a hard one to deal with, especially if you see it up close. So there's those moments where you hear about something, and then of course there's the flip side of the issue, which is where people don't want someone who's been living on the streets for a month on their front doorstep. They feel like this is an invasion of my space or my property or my privacy, or just it's an unpleasant reminder of the reality of what our community really is made up of. And so so we have to balance the notion of making sure that our public spaces are clean and safe, but with offering real shelter. Because you don't just, if you move people on, you don't solve the problem. And we've seen that time and time again. People have been shooed away from places, and in some cases legitimately so. I'm not suggesting folks should just say, oh, okay, well, there's nowhere to sleep, so you might as well sleep here. But we have to remember that the homelessness epidemic is tied with a mental health crisis. Right. It's tied with our wealth inequality. It's tied and income inequality, which of course we know has been growing. And it's tied with a whole range of other things that, frankly, it's really costly to do it the way we do it now. And there were some stories, it was probably 5-6 years ago, $1 Million Murray and these sort of headlines that caught everybody's eye that said that, if you actually calculate the cost of caring for someone who has no shelter, their time in and out of jail, their time in and out of rehab, their time in and out of hospitals and emergency rooms, it is a really expensive way to live. And so what they made the economic argument. So even if the moral imperative or the social imperative or anything else wasn't enough, you could make that economic argument that it's actually cheaper to just house everybody. And the sort of housing first model was
I was just going to ask you about that. The housing first model kind of became a thing. I've seen that in the apartment complex we had in Dallas, where we had a permanent. We had 488 units in one complex. Everything's big in Texas. 488 units. 70 of them, or somewhere around 70 of them, were a permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless. They had to be chronically homeless with a disability, which could be alcoholism, could be. But if you had those two things, and you submitted to the program, which included testing, you had a caseworker, it was permanent. And I thought it worked well.
That's brilliant.
It was now unfortunately there's not a lot of complexes, like where we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But I saw the housing part where you put a roof over somebody's head, and we'd have a bed for them and a couch, and that then it gave you a shot at answering some of the other.
Exactly.
It gave you a shot at the mental health. Have you seen it? I'm sure you've seen it work.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the model, and I don't think there's any question left about is that the right way. It is the only way that's worked at a large scale, which is you can deliver services endlessly, but if someone doesn't have a stable roof and a home and a bed, you're never going to get past that first step. But if you can first house somebody and then deliver whatever supports they need on site, and it's just not that expensive compared to the cost of keeping someone homeless.
Right.
So in our community, I mean, you asked about here, I will say we have one of the best run, and I just retired. I'm kind of biased. I just retired from another volunteer job. But I spent 12 years on the commission for the Housing Authority for the city of Santa Barbara.
Okay.
In fact, my last meeting was just last week.
Oh, really?
And I have so much respect for that crew. I mean, it's led right now by Rob Fredericks and his team, and they do it right. They just do it right, and they've done it for over 50 years. So we have a great model of how it can work. We also have an incredible nonprofit group. I mean, you have Transition House for families experience homelessness. You have the Rescue Mission. You have PATH, which is formerly the Cacique Shelter, formerly Casa Esperanza. And so each of them do a piece of the puzzle. The problem, again, is scale, and we don't have enough beds, and we don't have enough infrastructure to do it for everyone that needs it. And so that's really the question on the table. You may have seen Los Angeles a couple of years ago passed a pair of measures that actually funded homeless services at a remarkable level. But you can see today, even that the money alone doesn't solve the problem. So it's huge, it's complex, I think it's critical, and to this day, it was one of the first issues I got involved with, but I would say if I had to pick what's the most critical, that would be in the top two. Top three, maybe. Yeah.
You do a lot. So I was reading. It took me a while, but what drives you? I mean, I honestly, I don't know if I've read about somebody your age who's kind of done this much, and a lot of it's volunteer leadership. But what gets you up in the morning? I mean, why do you do all this?
That's a fair question. I think. And I don't mean this to sound trite, but I grew up, I never worried about all these things that I work on. I grew up, I have a wonderful family, didn't worry about have a roof over my head, food, had great schools. I feel like, what's the saying, to those to whom much is given, much is expected.
Right.
I mean, it's that notion of paying it forward, or however you phrase that. And I enjoy it because I like, personally, what I get out of it is the experience of seeing something work. So I like the challenge of seeing a problem and trying to fix it in some manner or figure out a solution, either something that hasn't been tried before or something that's only been tried at a small scale, and can you do it bigger? And I think that's a very human thing. I think there's a lot of us get satisfaction out of doing good, fixing a problem. And I tend to be a glass half full person on virtually everything. Including philanthropy, and maybe that's why I ended up accidentally doing the fundraising side of the work. And most fundraisers are accidental. In case you haven't heard us say that before, very few 5-year-olds say, "I want to be a fundraiser when I grow up." But I do think that that's a part of it. Is that it become, once you learn that that's the tool for all of this, money is just the tool. That's what it's for.
Right.
And if you can fundraise, there's a lot of people out there with plenty. And that's one of the interesting things of and really one of the tragedies of our moment is that there are so many people with so much, at the same time that there's more and more people with so little and not enough. And so bridging that, philanthropy isn't the solution in itself. There's a lot of things that go into how do you make that more equal so that everyone has a fair shot. But it can be a starter, and philanthropy can be the venture capital, if you will, to try something out in the nonprofit side. That otherwise might not have happened. And I love the sector because it's, this is probably not entirely fair to say this, but if government, you can't get the political will. So to do something through a governmental structure of any level, federal, local, you name it, you have to have the political will. If you can't build the political will, it's a non-starter. To do it in the for-profit sector, you have to have a profit model. So you have to be making money somehow. And if there's a problem that needs to be solved, but you can't figure out how to make money from it, it's a non-starter. So in between those two spaces is where the nonprofit sector lives, and it sort of draws from both. So you build political will among enough people that want to give, and institutions, and you build a model where you can generate enough revenue to get it going, and that's where the nonprofit sector lives.
And if you can do it in a sustainable way, you can make a big difference.
You can build on it. And if we think about the successful institutions in our community, most of them started as fairly radical nonprofit notions. I mean, they were this little idea that probably a whole lot of people said, I don't think that's going to work, Bob. But here we are. So so that's the satisfaction in it.
That's fantastic. Well, we're out of time already.
Yeah.
Geoff Green for president. Geoff Green for president.
That's not a job I'm seeking, but thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. Thanks for what you've done for the community, seriously.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.